All right. I would like to introduce you all to Mr. Stephen Riley. He's the founding director of ReMuseum, an attorney and entrepreneur who served as director of the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, Kentucky from 2017 to 2021. Everybody welcome Stephen.
Thanks, Annie. So I have an apology to start with that I'm standing in the way of your lunch, so we'll try to be quick. But a thank you to our friends at Art Bridges, because when I saw that I was speaking at lunch, my question very selfishly was like, when do I get to eat? So they figured out a solution that works for both. So I'm going to talk to you a little about ReMuseum, which is a project that kind of sits sort of between Crystal Bridges and Art Bridges. It was the brainchild of a great philanthropist and collector named David Booth, who's on the board and executive committee of the Museum of Modern Art, lives in Austin, and Alice Walton, our great patron here in Bentonville. And they talked about a lot of things a couple of years ago they might do together, and they still do that. But in this case, they said, what if we set up a project that was time limited to see if we couldn't help museums break out of their legacy systems and innovate? And that was their language. So David put up the money, and Alice and Crystal Bridges agreed to house the project. And I came on board at the end of 22 to figure out what all that meant. And we've also gotten some additional support from the Ford Foundation. And from the beginning, and one of the things I want to thank the folks at Art Bridges and Anne, since she came on, as I said, it feels philosophically like this project is kind of floating somewhere between Crystal Bridges and Art Bridges. Crystal Bridges, of course, was Alice's enormous disruptive effort to kind of reimagine what art could mean for a rural region like Northwest Arkansas. And the way I tell is that pretty quickly she saw that when she originally started buying great masterpieces of American art, they went straight on the walls. Then, of course, she started realizing they were going in storage, and that really wasn't what had excited her. So then I think part was the genesis of her saying, let's start up another foundation to figure out how do we get out of that kind of problem so the art gets where the people are all the time. And so ReMuseum kind of sits in between that. And so when you think about those legacy systems, that's sort of what I had to think about first. What would those mean? Because in some ways, legacy systems are great. They're kind of what got us where we are. They're why museums are trusted and respected. But we are at a point where those legacy systems are also now standing in the way of our sustainability, our relevance, and our ability to thrive in the future. So let's just look at a couple of those areas where it's problematic. So the structure of the enterprise of a museum is now putting financial sustainability into a genuine crisis in museums. So let's see what's going on. During COVID, we don't talk about this much, but COVID delivered the greatest period of federal funding for the arts than we will ever see in our lifetimes. I'd like to think that might recur, but you have to, the scale of that funding of the various forms of relief were enormous. That cash ran out for most museums about a year ago. At the same time, the average museum is seeing audiences that are at least 20% below where they were before. So the answer can't be just to raise ticket prices in fulfillment of our mission. At the same time, staff costs out of both the desire and the demand to compensate more equitably have been rising. So this is not a critique, it's a fact that staff costs for the average museum have risen from where they were at about 50-ish% of the operating budget, closer to 70, some cases higher. That's creating a challenge that no one has yet figured out a solution for. At the same time, in fundraising, which is the primary source of revenue to pay for all these costs, we're seeing a generational shift in what are called next-gen donors who are not fundamentally interested in supporting the institutions for the same reasons their grandparents or their predecessor philanthropists did, which were more commonly from kind of elitism, collection-based, building-based donors. Now we're seeing climate, sustainability, and public impact be the drivers. So the models we built are now in crisis, and we really can't pay the bills. At the same time, we are, and you all have done this, that the way we have been collecting and accumulating collections in museums is, as a matter of fact, an unsustainable practice. This is not just an opinion. It just cannot, it's not saying it's bad to keep growing our collections, but as a matter of fact, it will not lead. It will start to become an unbearable burden for the institution to be able to fulfill its mission. So I was on a Zoom yesterday co-teaching a class at Williams with Michael Govan, know, there are folks from LACMA, so I'm always wary directors may not say something that everyone agrees with, because directors can say whatever they want. But he talked about a point that museums have where your expense on your collection can actually exceed your expense on your programs. And he pointed out that LACMA has exceeded that. So when you start to think that, you think, well, what is this collection really for? What are we here to do? And so that answer is unsustainable. To the extent that we build buildings or enlarge our buildings to show those unsustainably growing collections, that's not going to work either. There was a great report recently from the University of Lausanne really applying ESG kind of analysis to museums and cultural institutions, and pointed out that, you know, even building sustainably is not a solution to sustainability problems. So we've got those problems. And finally, I want to talk about staffing and sustainability. If you think about the challenges that you all are part of, the conversations, the challenges not just towards equitable compensation, but job satisfaction, career enhancement in museums, I think it's really important to look at that as a sustainability issue. You know, because you can say like, well, does somebody have the right perspective? Do we need to educate people? Should we, whatever the right solutions are, we don't have an answer right now. Something in the structure of the museum is not really working for the people who are committed to working for the museum. And that's another sustainability problem. So I looked at these issues and I said, well, do we need to do another study? And the answer is no, because everyone's already studied all of this. It turned out 30 years ago, there's this book I love by the National Bureau of Economic Research showing that the business model at museums was fundamentally broken, proposing some solutions that haven't been tried a lot. 20 years ago, there's a great dissertation by a woman who's now a researcher at the Wallace Foundation on the utilization of permanent collections. The Fine Art Museums in San Francisco partnered with her. Great ideas in this report that I can't find anyone who's ever read. 10 years ago, the Wallace Foundation published a book with Stephen Tepper and Bill Ivey called Engaging Art, full of amazing ideas about how the public wants to see interpretation to be a dialogue more than a monologue. We have an opportunity to dramatically grow relevance where their audiences, those ideas are not being generally carried out. Today, we have groups like the Black Trustee Alliance that Brooke Minto was the founding executive director of, Museums Moving Forward, Arts Funders Forum. The stuff is all out there, and all these people are frustrated that change is not happening. So what would you do if you were tasked with helping museums break out of their legacy systems and innovate? I found the answer in museums themselves. So we know this, that the mission statements of museums have been radically changing over the last 3 decades. Museum mission statements used to say that their fundamental purpose was something like preserving objects for the benefit of the public. Note a kind of passive public in that phrasing. Today, almost without exception, museums center the public and public service and engagement in their mission statements. We've actually done the research and documented that that's now 9 out of 10 museums. So it is now basically a universal fact that the field centers the public, not objects, in its mission statements. So what does that mean? 60% don't even mention objects or collections in their mission statement anymore. That's a majority. So this is not me, it's not an opinion, it's what these museums, their leadership, and their boards have agreed that their fundamental purpose is today. So I thought about this when I realized, thinking about a collection specifically, well, how does the collection serve the mission? And in that sense, there's nothing wrong with continuing to grow your collection, but there is if you don't have additional answers to just hanging it on our gallery walls. We've got to find new solutions to deploy those collections in service of the public. And that can mean lots of different things. So I thought about, what if we actually found a way to measure museum effectiveness at serving their new missions? So part of ReMuseum's work now is a research project. And we have a research partnership with some people I know some of you have some awareness with at Indiana University. The Culture Center for Cultural Affairs, started by Joanna Waronkowitz and Doug Noonan. Through their affiliate IO, they're actually using a methodology developed in Europe called DEA, which actually figures out efficiency or effectiveness at museums, at any kind of enterprise that's serving its mission. We have a task force of museum leaders from museums of all different sizes, leaders from philanthropy, nonprofit law, et cetera, helping inform them about what kind of data will go in. How do we find the right mix of inputs and the right outputs to measure this effectiveness if all museums are actually saying they want to do more or less the same thing. We're going to issue our first report in the next couple of weeks. It's a very preliminary one about the shift in missions. So we're going to announce, I think this thing we all know, but documenting that museum missions are now wholly centering the public and provoking the kind of conversations around that. At the same time, we're addressing, because we need more data, the fact that this field that centers the public in its mission statements has not yet centered the public in the information it shares. So we picked two kind of pretty average data points that you would say an average public nonprofit should share with the public, which is number of visitors and its consolidated or audited financial statements. Fewer than 17% of the museums in the AMD currently share those with the public. That's not even 1 out of 5. And I would argue that's kind of table stakes and sort of public accountability for a nonprofit whose mission is not to serve its donors or its board or the collector class, but is to actually serve the public and generate nonprofit tax deductions because of that. We will be doing more research over the year. We're talking to AMD because we would love to get them on board and partnering with sharing more of the data they collect through their annual statistical survey, and ultimately hoping to lead more conversations around how do you explore these innovations that could be measured. That's a little bit of a stick, but we also have a carrot, a big one, because we need to see as a culture of supporting innovation, trial and error, people being willing to experiment in this messy middle space. Because when I say we've shifted from the object to the public, we haven't rejected the object, obviously. It's a balancing act, and we need new sets of rules to make that work. I mean, I'll use a quick example of repatriation, because there's not really talking about sensitive issues here, or at least about standards of care. The old models of museum defenses to claims of repatriation just don't work anymore. They're not sustainable. So in my lifetime, or the last couple decades, we've gone through waves of repatriation of Nazi-looted art. We've seen claims from the ancient world, primarily Greece and Italy. We've now seen African nations appropriately rise up and say, what about these objects of our cultural patrimony and matrimony? And now we see indigenous claims dramatically changed by legislation. Great question about the role of law, because museums knew they weren't doing this, and now they have to because the federal government with NAGPRA said you have to. I use this as an example because this is an example of how we have to now find a model between the old legacy system, which was to say, the statute of limitations has run. Our claim of title, our chain of title is completely airtight, it's ours, or these were the spoils of war, or sometimes even, we're taking care of it better than you would have. Those arguments don't work anymore when it's to the level of the Prime Minister of England having to defend their nation's claim on the Parthenon marbles, or even in America saying a sacred object to a local tribe has to be now exhibited in conversation and sensitive relationship with the tribe itself. That's a call we're being made as museums to this middle space between the object and the public, and I think it's actually going to teach us a lot of wonderful things, but we have to get more comfortable with each other in supporting experimentation and innovation, celebrating successes and failures along the way. And as a field, we have not been really good at that, to be honest. We're a field that has been really ready to call things bad or good, ethical or unethical. And I think as long as people are trying to do things in service of the mission, we need to be more willing to celebrate and connect. So in that sense, realizing that there aren't a lot of forums for innovators to get together, ReMuseum has had a few convenings of museum leaders with board members, because we also have to change the conversations that are happening and bring those conversations closer to each other. One was around new business models that some museums were experimenting with. Another was around this core financial sustainability question. We're working with Art Bridges and talking about a convening this fall around issues of audience development, what I might call marketing, but we're looking at kind of museums, because even when you talk to really big museums, they feel very unconfident that they know how much money to invest in audience development, what the return should be, how to do it. And that's the same as fundraising. We're also talking to the Doris Duke Foundation as a partner about organizing and convening around models of ownership. We've got to create and rethink the way we own art co-own art, share art, move art around, make it permeable in ways that we need 100 different models of examples to learn from. I think there are amazing examples of innovation out there. You all are part of them. We're seeing some of them. I'll talk about just a couple because I don't want to sound like it's just a critical mode. You're going to hear from the Georgia O'Keeffe. Where is Glenn, who I haven't met, actually? Cronkite. That's you, okay. You didn't identify. So this is a model you're going to hear about. I'm not going to tell you, except the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum has developed a for-profit spinoff with proprietary art creating technology that is like on so many ways exciting to kind of resolve a challenge you all are all addressing, but in a way that can actually serve the museum's financial sustainability into the future is one of the coolest things I know. We also see a number of museums experimenting. Well, if I step back a second, the museum field used to say that the art market was a separate thing and we didn't want it to taint our work. Well, I think we've known for a long time the market it is in the museum. And that's whether the museum acknowledges that by exhibiting work of living artists, we are helping create their market. Not a bad thing to be in the market in that sense. But we also know gallerists walk through galleries with checklists, offering works on museum walls for sale. So museums have let galleries make a lot of money from this work, and I think there are museums trying to figure out where can we explore those boundaries. Because this is a little touchy, we've created a working group to try to provide some cover for those. One of them is the Toledo Museum. Actually, Glenn Lowry just talked about an example that he learned about at ReMuseum's convening. Toledo Museum has a huge acquisition endowment. Unlike a lot of museums, whether you have a big acquisition endowment or not, you never have enough operating dollars. So what they figured out is, so they're always in the market looking for work. There was some work at auction they wanted to buy last year. And instead of just like museums usually do, like going to the auction and not getting the work in a hot market, they actually guaranteed the work at auction so that they knew the price they were willing to pay. If it had not gone to that amount, they were like, this is a price we were willing to pay for the next 100 years of our collection. We're fine with that. And they didn't get the works, and so but they also collected a guarantee fee. So Toledo collected $500,000 of guarantee fees last year for its operating budget by not acquiring work it would have been happy to get otherwise. So that's a real win-win. MoMA doesn't advertise this a lot, but it's actually collecting commissions on the NFT sales of work by Rafik Anadol, is now funding a position in digital art. Seems totally appropriate to me. No one's criticized them yet. The Contemporary Art Museum in Houston is actually looking at a investment fund because it's been kind of an accelerator, like a lot of contemporary art museums for artists. It's actually looking at investors putting up money to fund the commissioning of work that the museum and the artists will benefit from, but so will the investors. So there are lots of models of innovation. I'm going to be around the next couple of days. I want to hear from you all what you're seeing out there, because my job is to shine a light on it, surface it, connect it, and help the field learn from the people who are willing to live like artists do in this complicated middle space where we don't have all the answers. Asma? So that's why there's a stick in with the carrot. Because I genuinely think, and people who've kind of been helping me think through this, is that we actually have to call institutional funders. We have to get the attention of boards, to be honest, and to really be challenged with the question of whether they're serving the tax-exempt basis of their institutions, or certainly whether they're embracing the mission statements that they have so enthusiastically supported and advertised to the public. I think we're looking at metrics of accountability to actually, call them to this. I'm really bullish on museums because I think that we have the right missions. If we just actually lean into them and do that work, the work of museums will matter to more people, and institutions that matter to more people tend to be able to find the support they need. But we have to be willing to get into that space of really leaning into these public-centered missions. Well, I'm hoping for a response to just this very first research report from them right now. So they've, I think, I was member of AMD. One of the reasons we're doing convening is it's just not one of the things they have chosen to do. They haven't chosen to help use the data they have to make any of it public. I hope they will be willing to engage in conversations around that. And I think if they don't, it'll be a little bit to their detriment. I mean, as you know from other conversations, I think the AMD is a picture of this shift in missions, right? There's a heavy weighting to that older legacy systems. And again, we need it's the balancing act. And I think they also have to be called more into this balance, which isn't easy. Yes, so just AMD is a little funny. So museums aren't actually members of the AMD. Directors are members of the AMD. So weirdly, like if your museum doesn't have a director, you aren't a member of AMD. It's a strange, technical matter. The AMD almost annually has this very big statistical survey with literally hundreds of questions. So if you all have probably been part of efforts to answer those questions. It is not very regulated in the sense that they don't clearly define a lot of the questions that are answered. And then they're compiled onto a spreadsheet that's shared with members. Interestingly to me, the AMD never actually presents anything about that data to the membership. I talked to a president, former president of AMD, and who's been in the field for a long time. She said she had never known them to say anything about the data they collect to the membership itself, which suggests a question like, why are they doing it? I found it very useful because the problem is there aren't any good databases about the field. There is, as far as I know, I'd love you to give me an example. I do not know of another nonprofit field in the social sector space that has shared less data with the public about its work than the art museum field. I really mean it. I mean, universities got over it. The science and children's museums do it because the National Science Foundation requires them to. Zoos, food banks, performing arts, I think even do, maybe they may be the closest. And I think some of this is the hold of this kind of, frankly, the old business model, which was funded by a small group of people in a city like Louisville, where I live, or Baltimore, who said, well, we've got this. And I think that attitude, I think it'll be hard for the field. I really believe it will be good for the field. One, it will allow them to understand how they relate to each other. I think museums should be very free to be more individual and more unique and say, like, we actually want to be different than the field. The other thing is that nobody owns innovation. Museums are full of brilliant people, but there is no field that innovates without making it possible for outsiders to bring innovative ideas to them. And if you don't have any access to data about the field, no one's even trying to bring innovative ideas in that sense because you can't figure out whether they would help or not. So I think it's just a Band-Aid that we kind of have to get over. And I think one of the issues, and I am sympathetic when you think about how challenged the business model is, there is fear about showing your dirty laundry. But I think if that calls you to kind of lean into your mission, other fields have done that and found support, rather more support than blame, I should say. And I think in the public sphere, I mean, you're right, we have benefited. The legacy systems created a lot of trust. Let's be on, and I think now we're in a transition point that there are different elements are required to keep retaining and earn it from next generations. And transparency, frankly, is now the price of trust for many people who aren't already museum funders. Yes. I mean, I think we really have to challenge, that's why the issues I'm looking at are financial sustainability, relevance, and governance, because I think we always have to be asking, do we matter to enough people in the right ways? And are we really adopting the practices that will engender that kind of relevance to real people, meeting them where they are in their lives, and not just the pre-selected, we know who they are. Masha? And this is what the Burns-Halpern report, another day, like we don't need more data. They have shown us correcting the black wealth gap is going to take centuries for collections if we really want them, museum collections, because Well, I totally agree, and that's why I say it's not a bad thing to keep collecting art. There are lots of reasons, but what Charlotte and Julia showed in that report, of course, is if you look at what's coming in, it's not changing it. Because the predominant, because a huge majority of acquisitions or accessions are coming by gift, and the gifts are still reflecting white male artists. And to the extent, even when they are reflecting black artists, it's a very narrow tier of the sort of market superstars, which is great. So I think the other point is, so I think they were calling us to do in that report, and I'd love to see some models, and it gets very controversial when you try to rebalance your collection through other modes of other kinds of transactions, let's say. But why are we so rigidly opposed to that idea? And I will just say something I say about Baltimore all the time, because it's used as like, we don't want to do that. No one dares question the rationale for what Baltimore was proposing. I don't care. We can have a great debate over whether that was the right thing to do or not. But the goal, this is why we need to say, well, what are the other ways we could be accomplishing those goals? Because otherwise we've got lopsided collections that for our grandchildren's lifetimes are going to be way overweighted to reflecting kinds of artists who don't reflect the world our grandchildren live in. So if we aren't willing to talk about dispersing collections, sharing collections, making them more permeable, maybe selling some art, then the collection it is just going to grow and not change as fast as many of us would like to see. I will say, I think your point about, I say around museums, with the funding, we have built our business models around a certain type of funder. And so what we know about them is that they have overweighted towards liking, they're the collector class, so they like collecting, either funding acquisitions or giving us art, and they like buildings to put their collections in. We don't know. I think there's a whole bunch of funders out there who will like these other things that we can do, but it's very hard to feel like, I've been also in business, and if you have sort of a dominant customer, it's hard to imagine a world without that customer, right? But sometimes you lose that customer, and all it turns out you have a better future, because it's like, oh, now I have funders who want to fund my environmental initiatives, or I have funders who want to fund salaries and education programs, and not more buildings that just raise my operating costs that I don't know how to pay for. And I've almost never seen a funder who will fund operations proportionally to the degree to which they funded the building campaign. And again, I'm not anti-buildings, but it's like they've become our substitute for a lot of other things. Well, I'm excited to be here, because I think the Art Bridges, our friends at Art Bridges, and I know where Anne's taking this is really, why it's not just about the work. It's about the access and understanding what works in access. It's about community engagement and finding models that can be replicated in museums without Art Bridges funding. It's about how do you build the right audience, build the right big new audiences for the work, and then how do you change the sets of practices that make the art more permeable responsibly in service of the public that we're here for. So I'm around. I'm happy to talk. I'm excited to work with Annie and all of you in the work. Thank you, Art Bridges, and lunchtime. Okay.